Hello, F1 fans. Welcome back to the F1 Masters podcast brought to you by AUBG Daily. As usual, you're joined by myself, David, Vasco, and Harry. And today we'll be discussing the Las Vegas GP weekend. And we'll start off with the practice session, especially in Friday. There was quite a lot of controversy, some may say.
Well, we did not expect anything from this weekend, but it started on really high with this amazingly bad thing with Carlos Sainz and the session that was stopped only after 5 minutes. And I'm not sure why actually that was overlooked. But we know it wasn't good for the fans, it wasn't good for F1, and especially for Carlos Sainz, who received 10 place grid penalty for this thing that he couldn't control, actually.
Yeah, I think it was an unnecessary penalty as he couldn't do anything. I mean, it was the organizer's fault that this drain cover was not sealed well enough. Also, we have to mention that the fans were literally kicked out of the circuit and they couldn't watch even FP2, which is scandalous if you ask me. This shouldn't happen in F1.
And after that, they did not receive a normal refund. They only received $200 voucher for the F1 store, which is hilarious for me. And what do you think about that overall? If there is a situation like that again, if it happens, do you think that the team that has suffered from a circumstance like that should be penalized from FIA?
No, I personally thought at the time when the incident happened that he shouldn't get any penalties based on the damage that Carlos suffered during the practice session. In the end, he had to take a penalty because he had to change his battery due to the incident, and he didn't do anything wrong. It's not like he crashed. The track literally was not in a proper condition and it caused damage to his car. It wasn't his fault, wasn't the team's fault. There wasn't any technical problem before that. So I think that there should have been some kind of exemption, but the teams voted, as far as I'm aware, and they did not all agree to give him the right to not have a penalty.
Well, these are the rules, but sometimes I think FIA should relate to circumstances like this in more subjective way, because that wasn't at all the fault of Ferrari or Carlos Sainz. But jumping to the qualifying session, we had, I can say, amazing standings at the end. But the overall qualifying session, the highlights that we saw were that both of the McLarens were out in Q1. Also, Yuki Tsunoda, that was miles below everybody else in this qualifying session. And also in Q2, Hamilton and Sergio Perez were out, which is another talking point. And overall, your opinions about the qualifying session?
The qualifying session was very interesting considering the nature of the circuit. Very slippery, with the cold conditions. Tires were really struggling to get to temperature. And we saw a lot of surprises, as you already mentioned. And in Q3, we also saw the two Williams cars finishing 6th and 7th in qualifying, and after Sainz's penalty, moving up to 5th and 6th, which was extremely surprising at the time. But the most, impressive was the Ferrari 1-2 in qualifying. Leclerc, pole position, 23rd pole position of his career, which is crazy considering he has 4 wins in his career. And Sainz's penalty, unfortunately, brought him down the order, which I think cost Ferrari more points than what they got in the end.
And I think even that could cost Carlos Sainz this 4th place in the championship.
Yeah, even though it was not his fault. And I also have to mention George Russell's pretty good qualifying. He was P4, he started P3 for the race. And Pierre Gasly being P5 was also something interesting.
Yeah, the strong pace of Williams was a big talking point with Alex Albon and Logan Sargent. For the first time, both of them were in Q3. And 6th and 7th place are very respectable, in my opinion. But going to the race, we have a lot of talking points. Let's start with the podium places and the DNFs. Max Verstappen was first. Only 2 seconds behind him, we had Charles Leclerc. and Sergio Perez, which had a battle for that second position till the last corner of the race. And the DNFs were Lando Norris, Nico Hülkenberg, and Yuki Tsunoda.
Let's start off with the opening lap. We all know what happened in turn 1. Verstappen and Leclerc had a little bit of an not coming together, but it was like a controversial moment, let's say, because Leclerc was pushed off the track and this resulted in a penalty for Max, which was no big surprise. Down the order, we had some spins. For example, Alonso, he just spun it around. He couldn't control the car. Also, Carlos Sainz hit Lewis Hamilton and spun himself around. And Bottas and Perez were also involved in the Alonso incident. And we have to mention that Lance Stroll gained an impressive 10 places during lap 1, which was, I didn't expect this to happen, especially from Lance. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, overall, about the opening lap, just crazy start. I think once again, proving just the temperatures, how costly they can be to F1 cars and the tire temperatures. So many spins. We saw Verstappen not only push Leclerc off the track, but he went off the track himself. It was a justified 5-second penalty when he got it. And yeah, Stroll gaining 10 places was really quite unusual, but impressive. And his race only went up from there. But now we'll move on to something that happened a little after the start, and that was Lando Norris's big crash, which was caused due to a bump in the circuit, and he lost control of the car and smashed into the wall quite hard and had to be taken to the hospital for checks, but luckily everything was okay. But overall, a weekend to forget for Lando Norris, I think.
Well, another weekend to forget for Logan Sargent. I think in his third home Grand Prix of the season, he had really good qualifying session. For his standards, that Williams looked alright for me, but at some point he started falling down the order, and in the end he finished 16th after 7th place in qualifying session, which was looking very promising. So another disappointing weekend for Williams. If they have taken at least 1, 2, 3 points from that race, they could have been a bit calmer about their place before the last race of the season. But right now, I think they'll get that 7th place, but still AlphaTauri are 7 points behind them. It's a lot for the teams at the bottom, but we still don't know what is going to happen at the last race of the season.
Absolutely. And moving on to another driver, Oscar Piastri. He had a pretty interesting race, I suppose. Obviously, the really poor qualifying, but he made his way through the field really well, especially after his teammate went out of the race. McLaren were really relying on him to score some good points, and he was up in 4th place towards the end of the race, and then made a pit stop 6 laps before the end and only finished 10th, which was very underwhelming. I thought that he should have continued to the end and gambled maybe on making sure his tires would get to the end. What do you guys think about that situation?
Yeah, I think that it was probably a bad strategy call from McLaren. They could have done something different, and we have to mention that Piastri got the fastest lap, which is impressive, but I think that they could have played it out way better, and Oscar could have received some solid points from this race. Another interesting topic was the Verstappen-Russell incident, which happened around 30, and George Russell consequently received a penalty because he basically turned in on Max, and there was a lot of debris on the track. There was a safety car, which actually changed the race and benefited drivers such as Lance Stroll, who made the pit stop, made the call, and then he rose up the order.
Yeah, also we have to mention Ocon and Gasly and their fight, and especially we have to mention the race that Esteban Ocon had. After everything that happened during the race, in the end he was 4th, which is pretty respectable for him, and great points, 12 points for Alpine and 13 places gained from Esteban Ocon, which is pretty impressive for me. And again, I want to mention that Alpine, they have an okay pace, and that car with that drivers can be much better if they find a solution to their problems. And next season, I really want to see this push from Alpine, and I want to see them closer, not to the top teams, but like to be at least closer to McLaren and Aston Martin. And why not, if Ferrari or Mercedes have a bad season, they can move up the order if something like that happens. Lastly, we have to mention one of the most interesting events during the Grand Prix, and that was the last lap and the fight between Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, which eventually ended in Charles Leclerc gaining that second position, but that was fight till the end.
The battle was really, we could say, three-way, especially during the earlier stages of that final portion. We had another safety car after the Russell and Verstappen incident, and it left Charles Leclerc in first, but on older tires, the Red Bull made a new pit stop, and Perez and Verstappen clearly had pace, more than Leclerc, especially in the beginning, and we saw Perez take the lead, and then Leclerc fought back, which was really surprising, and then Max caught up to them and passed them both. Then we saw Leclerc make a critical mistake, luckily kept it out of the wall after a big lockup and lost the place to Perez, but he didn't give up and he fought back on the very last lap to snatch that second place. Overall, really impressive driving from all three, and I really want to mention how good Charles Leclerc's weekend was, and it was a shame that he lost the win, but I think it was one of his best weekends of the season.
He was voted driver of the day, so I can agree on that. Also, after the whole weekend, after all the controversies, all the events, everything that happened during the practice sessions, the qualifying session, and the race, what is your overall opinion of that controversial Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Before the race, I thought that the weekend was going terribly, especially after what happened on Friday and people complaining about, oh, this is a show and not a sport. You know, Max Verstappen was very vocal about the issues, but I feel like everyone's minds changed after that race, pretty much due to the fact that it was a really good race, really entertaining. We saw a lot of overtaking. It was actually the second most overtakes of the season, only behind Zandvoort. So I think the race salvaged Las Vegas, and it'll be here to stay. I think people enjoyed it, and it will continue to provide, I think, interesting racing in the future.
Yeah, we can only hope that the next year when we come back to Las Vegas, the race will be again that interesting. But moving on to the highlights of the weekend, and let's start with your highlight, Harry. What impressed you during this weekend?
For me, an impressive performance was the one of Ocon, who managed to get P4 in the Alpine. At a certain moment in the race, he was behind Gasly, and I remember that Alpine said, no, don't fight, keep the position, but Ocon was like, I just don't want to stay behind this guy, I'm faster. He overtook him on track, and then he continued on until the end, and I was really, impressed with what I saw.
For me, the highlight of the weekend is that both of the Williams cars made it to Q3 and had respectable positions, 6th and 7th. And although that was in my predictions for the last week, I was still impressed with their qualifying pace, but after that the race proved me wrong about my good feeling about Williams during the Las Vegas Grand Prix.
My highlight of the weekend was Charles Leclerc. I already praised him, but he had pole position in qualifying, and even though he lost the lead to Max on the opening lap, he re-overtook him during the first stint, and after Max's penalty, he had a really strong advantage out in front, and I truly believe if the second safety car didn't happen, he would have went on to win that race. So really unfortunate for him that he had to settle for second, but I think that considering the season he's had, he deserves all the applause he's gotten during this weekend.
And moving on to disappointments and surprises of the weekend, let's go back to you, Harry. What are the disappointments for you of the weekend and surprises also?
The disappointment has to go to Lando Norris. I set high expectations for him, and he just crashed it out on lap 3. And the surprise is the McLaren Q1 exit. So overall, I would say that McLaren just under-delivered this weekend.
So you can say that there are two disappointments of the weekend.
Yeah.
For me, Esteban Ocon and Lance Stroll were really surprising with their pace and their final positions. Although their qualifying sessions weren't great, in the end, 4th and 5th place are really good for both of the pilots, and I think that can boost their confidence before the last race of the season, which can be helpful for them. And the disappointment for me goes to Mercedes, because another weekend with poor performances, their car is not looking sharp, and everything in Mercedes, when I see them, tells me, yeah, we're waiting for this season to end, and we put all our hope in the next season.
My surprise of the weekend was how good of a race it was, not only due to the horrible weekend during the Friday and Saturday, but also the track layout itself. I thought that it doesn't really promote racing. There's just this huge straight and that's it. But there were quite a lot of overtaking opportunities and I really enjoyed it. And the disappointment was Sainz's penalty. I feel like it was not justified and he had a lot of points taken away from him. And if that hadn't happened, maybe we could have seen Ferrari sitting in second place in the constructors' standings at the moment.
And moving on to reactions and predictions for the next weekend, we decided to switch our predictions for the last Grand Prix of this year, and we will try to predict what is going to be the final standings of the pilots between 4th and 7th, and the P2 and P3 who is going to take it. And first, let's look at our predictions from the last weekend.
Okay, I'll start off with mine. I predicted Williams to score points. It didn't happen. Even though they did really well in qualifying, they didn't deliver the same pace during the race. And my other prediction was the Ferrari podium, which happened. Charles got P2, so I'm happy with that.
My predictions were that the race will be a complete failure. And I was so close to getting this, but unfortunately the race was too good. And my other prediction, though, was Lando Norris outside the top 5. Considering the form he was on, very bold prediction. He had a horrible weekend, so I'll take a point for that one.
Well, my predictions were that both Haas cars will be last in the race order when we exclude all the DNFs. Well, that wasn't true at all, but still poor weekend for both Haas. And the other prediction was that 3 out of the 4 cars of AlphaTauri and Williams will be in Q3, and the baby Red Bull team decided that they don't want to have pace in that qualifying session, and both Williamses, they made it to Q3, but that wasn't enough for my prediction to be on the spot.
Now we'll move on to our Abu Dhabi predictions. As Vasco already mentioned, we'll have special predictions. So first of all, the constructors' battle between Ferrari and Mercedes. At the moment, Mercedes are ahead by 4 points. But I'm predicting that Ferrari will take that second place at the final race of the season. And for my second prediction, my order for the drivers that will finish from 4th to 7th are as follows. In 4th, I have Sainz, 5th, Norris, 6th, Leclerc, and in 7th, Fernando Alonso.
For my predictions, I also think that Ferrari have better car and they will be P2 with Mercedes being P3. And the Constructors' Championship will be sealed for Ferrari being second. Moving to the Drivers' Championship, I think Lando Norris will seal the deal and be 4th, with Carlos Sainz being 5th, Fernando Alonso 6th, and Charles Leclerc being 7th.
I'm the only one who's gonna say that Mercedes will take P2 because I'm a fan of the team. And for the drivers, mine are the same as Vasco's ones. I think that Norris will take P4, Sainz P5, Alonso P6, and Charles P7. And this is all for today from us, guys. We are looking forward to the next race week. Till then, like, subscribe, and follow us and AUBG Daily on Instagram and Facebook, and stay tuned for more of our content.
Thank you, and remember, if you no longer go for a gap that exists,
You're no longer a racing driver.